Hi all, and welcome to the Welly Walk podcast. I'm Jennifer Palmer. This is the second episode. Thank you for coming again. And if this is your first time to the podcast, maybe go back and listen to the first one, because this is going to be a continuation of that one, a part two. The first one is where I talked about the catalyst that kicked me into gear. So I found a lump in my breast, turned out to be pointing to cancer in the other breast, and the little cancer journey there, as they often do, became more of a mental health crisis, and that it made me realize that I wasn't living my life as I had wanted to live my life, and it was really up to me to change things, to put my foot down. And my sanity was on the brink thanks to chronic stress, thanks to a life filled with obligations and doing the things that I thought I had to do because I had to do them as a mother. I had to do them as a wife. I had to hold up my end of a bargain, and the cost was my self, was my sense of self, my career, my curiosity, and that was a big penalty to pay because it amounted to depression. And I was hurting myself by allowing all this to continue. Today is Mother's Day. I'm recording on Mother's Day. And it's beautiful outside. It is crystal clear sky, this kind of Arctic blue. The wind is coming from Siberia still, but the sun is hot. And I'm sorry for all those people in America. This is, what day is it? March 30th. So there's plenty of people still in America with snow. And we've got daffodils here, and the trees are starting to blossom, and it's very hopeful. And but it's also in the UK daylight savings time, which the irony was not lost on my husband, who, when we came down this morning, said, "I bet a lot of people are going to make jokes about how, of course, on Mother's Day you're getting your sleep stolen from you, and the day is shortened for you." And yeah, I was like, that is ironic. And I tried a lot to record this episode this week. I tried about 5 different times. But as life does, it just gets in the way. But also I had to listen to myself, because that's the whole theme of this year, has been finally listening to myself and giving myself some authority. Charlie asked me what I'd like to do today. And I said, actually, I'd really like to have a couple hours by myself to just finally get my thoughts in order and get this down. So here we are, and it's a bit dangerous because a child might burst into the room at any moment. So adding some jeopardy, isn't it exciting? So I had my breakdown. I had rushed into Charlie's study and demanded that things had to change. And we had gone for a walk. And what I wasn't forthcoming about was that I don't think I was being completely honest on this walk with him. And I think a big thing that happened for the remainder of that year was that I was not forthcoming with Charlie about my feelings and about what I was going through, because I still felt beholden to make life comfortable for him and for everyone else. And unfortunate, inconvenient personal truths had to be hidden until they could be managed. So what I told him at the time was that I was going to approach my recovery time period after the next surgery as a time of experimentation, of a time for me to play around with the possibility of a career change. And with the idea that this career change was going to be the silver bullet that would fix me, that would give me purpose and make life whole again for myself. And lift me out of this depression, which I don't think he really knew that I was in. I was doing a very good job of hiding it, and I think I've always been very good at hiding depression my whole life. At least I think I am. And, but really, I didn't trust this as a strategy because something inside of me was telling me that I'm not being honest. And I think really what I needed to do was be upfront and be vulnerable. But I wasn't prepared to do that because of my background, because I was raised at all costs not to be vulnerable and to take care of everything yourself. And that you shouldn't be indulgent. You shouldn't wallow. And so I approached this whole thing like a GM, like a business meeting, proposing my strategy for the next quarter, and here are my targets. and I also thought that this was what Charlie would want to hear. He would want to hear something achievable, something that made sense and made things feel secure, and like the boat wasn't going to capsize. I wasn't going to tip the apple cart by being crazy. But I was still brewing with craziness in my head and rumination. And I had started to also feel and recognize that not only was I blaming the career, but I was also blaming my marriage, my relationship for my issues, because I realized I didn't feel like I could talk openly about my feelings. And just to be upfront about this, I think that was also a red herring. I'm giving that away. And so if Charlie's listening to this, don't be terrified. But at the time, when you are in free fall and when you are in disorder in your mind and when you're depressed, it's like you're grasping onto anything to hold on to give you a sense of why this is happening. And it's so easy to blame everything around you, to blame your situation, to blame the world, to blame your marriage, to blame your relationships, to blame your parents, to blame your job. Whereas what I ended up finding was that the answer was much more, not complex, but in some ways simpler. So then, after this little divestment of emotion in the woods on our walk, I was still waiting for the blood results to come back. And in this time period of limbo, I tried to distract myself from the norm that I had been lobbed back into, and from the fact that I still felt completely overwhelmed by all the chores and the childcare and my teaching, which I had returned to, and the fact that I was still hurtling in my mind through this kind of abyss. And I tried to distract myself by doing a little masterclass in gut health, because that seems to be the first thing you always turn to, isn't it? Or at least I do, to diet, and there must be a solution in diet. And I started to make kombucha and yogurt and kimchi, and soon found out I was the only person in the house that wanted to eat kimchi. So that wing of my fermentation, practice quickly fell away. But, it felt like I was taking a step in the direction of turning my gaze back at myself and taking care of myself in some way. And then the news came that the bloods were fine. It had been 6 weeks of waiting. And now finally, my appointment with the surgeons could be made and I could have the dream surgery. My mastectomy with reconstruction from my own body bits. And it was booked for leap year. And everyone made funny jokes about how I wouldn't have to think about that date again for 4 years, which I assured them isn't exactly how this kind of thing works. And as the surgery came upon me, I started to get nervous, but I was excited. I was excited. It was like a explore it before the journey begins. I was preparing myself. I was gathering my provisions, and I was fiercely guarding them. I was afraid that this adventure might get knocked off course early on. And then the week before the surgery, I had to do all kinds of things to prepare for the surgery. I had to put this antibiotic soap all over me and stand for 3 minutes in the cold in our bathroom in February while it worked. And that was every single day for a week, I think. And then I had to inject myself with blood thinners. And then the night of the surgery came, and my friend was going to pick me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, Hannah. She's a morning lark, and she volunteered for this. This way Charlie could take the boys to school and kind of provide a little bit of normalcy. But I couldn't sleep all night. I was so wound up. I was so nervous. My heart was racing. And my brain could not settle down. And finally 5 o'clock came around and I was awake and got into the car, and Hannah drove me 2.5 hours to where the surgery was going to take place. And my surgeon from the lumpectomy was there. She was going to be performing the mastectomy part and then handing over to the plastic surgeons. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you okay? Are you sure you want to do this?" And I just said, "No, I really don't. I couldn't sleep all night. I'm so nervous." And she said, "Well, we don't have to. It's okay. We can go back to the other hospital and I'll do the mastectomy and it will be simple." And I said, no. I've been thinking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, months at this point, and this is what I want. And so I hugged Hannah goodbye with a little bit of a cry, and I walked through the doors. And then things were fine. Things were fine from that point. They were more than fine. I felt all of a sudden this kind of excitement returning. That excitement that I had in preparing for this journey. And knowing in myself that I had made this choice and I was getting to have the thing that I wanted and it was going to fix me. And so I met with the plastic surgeons first, and they were very glamorous. The lead surgeon who I'd met with before was this Milanese goddess with dark mane of chestnut hair, and she was wearing a bodycon dress, and she just looked impeccable. She had high heels. And then the other surgeon was this young Greek, suave male surgeon who was quite flirtatious, but that was okay because he was European, was the feeling. But they looked like they were going out to a cocktail party. It was like I was in a TV show about surgeons. And I was not dressed for this cocktail party. I was in my hospital gown, and they marked me up with a pen showing everything that they were going to do, and lots of arrows pointing to various things. And I could see exactly how they were going to carve me up. And then I met with the anesthetist, who was very cool and rock and roll, and he had dark rimmed glasses, and we just had a nice chat about things that we had in common. And I felt like, oh, he could be a friend. We could go out for a cup of coffee. And then it was time to go through to the theater. Not the kind of theater that I have known. And they set me up on the bed, and I could see exactly how I was going to be lying for the next 8 to 12 hours. And the anesthetist started to chat with me about Bluey. We talked about how much we both love Bluey. And then I was out. And the next thing I knew, I woke up and I was in the recovery ward. And it was done. And I was awake. And I was better than awake. I was wide awake, and I was on morphine. I was perfectly happy and chilled. I was almost bubbly, I would say. And there were nurses taking care of me, Filipino nurses who were just lovely and warm and caring. And the surgeons came around, and they said everything had run smoothly. And as expected, I think it had been 8 hours as opposed to 10 or 12 hours. And they opened up the post-surgical bra that I had on to inspect the work. And the Milanese goddess was still in surgery, but it was the Greek. And with him was this older English surgeon. And they both nodded approvingly at the boobs. And I looked down and I could see what they had done, and I approved as well. They had basically planned out what the reconstruction was going to look like after the mastectomy, and they had given me a lift on my other breast to make it match, which was, consider what was a very saggy breast after breastfeeding 2 children and years of gravity, now looked like a perky little French number. So that was exciting. Didn't look like it belonged to me, but I was happy to take it from here. And the other breast, they had basically cut a hole around the nipple, popped the nipple off. So that was sad not to have a nipple anymore, but a price to pay. And they had taken from my leg a muscle called the gracilis. They had cut from just above the knee up into the inner thigh and across the front of the inner thigh. And they had taken a lob of fat from the top of my inner thigh, which I was happy to part with. And they had taken all that with the veins, put it through this hole they had made, small hole, it's not big, and plumbed it into my chest wall and figured it all into the shape of a breast. And then they had taken some skin from my leg and filled in the hole and sewed it up. And there you go. It was amazing. I have no idea how they do that. And these 2 surgeons were nodding approvingly and almost a little bit too approvingly, especially the older English surgeon. And the nurses behind him were, I just got the sense they were biting their tongues and trying not to roll their eyes. Anyway, it was fine. I was pleased as punch. And then the only thing that I would say about, I was there for 3 to 4 days. I can't remember exactly. It was 3 going on 4 days. And they had to come around every few hours and they'd listen in to the reconstruction with a Doppler just to see if they could hear the blood whooshing. Sorry, I hope I'm not making anyone feel queasy. But yeah, it was just like what you would do trying to listen to the heartbeat of a baby. And that was really hard for me because as soon as they did it, and I didn't expect this, I just got whooshed back to being in the hospital room with both of my miscarriages and there not being a heartbeat. And it was quite amazing how this, sound can just transport you very quickly back to something you don't want to be back with. And they did that every few hours. And they, not just on me, they were doing it to the other 3 patients who were in the ward with me. And the woman across from me, her reconstruction was struggling. The heartbeat was hard to find and it was faint and it was, by the end of the night, it was no longer there. It had failed and they had to wheel her off and back to surgery and take out everything they had done. And the heartbreaking thing was it wasn't her first time. They had tried before. I think they had tried 2 times before. And this was the last time they were going to be able to attempt the surgery. So that was heartbreaking, but also made me, so over the moon grateful. I mean, you just feel that. How have I landed in this? So lucky. Lucky first that I found a lump that pointed to the other breast and having stage 0 cancer. The fact that they knew about stage 0 cancer, which they didn't know about, I think, 20 years ago. And, that lump might have saved my life. Who knows if I would have caught it in the other breast. And if I had caught it in the other breast, it could have been a completely other story, one way or the other. And then the fact that I could have the surgery and that was available to me on the NHS, that, possibly if I was in another country, I wouldn't be able to have this. And that they're so mindful about the mental health of women having a mastectomy and how the scar of having a flat chest can affect you mentally. It keeps you aware of the fact that this has happened and, that we have the option to be sensitive to people's psychology and to give them this gift of having reconstruction and feeling whole again. And I would say with my other breast, highly improved. But, it wasn't all smooth sailing from this. I got home and I was in a lot of pain because when you take muscle from the leg, it is a more painful process than if you have the tummy tuck option, which hadn't been available to me. And so I had to go on Oxycontin. And my friends were like, don't give the American Oxycontin. She's going to get addicted. And to be honest, I can see why people get addicted to it. But also, I got so bunged up, so constipated. I was on so much Movicol. I would not be able, no chance. I'm never getting addicted to that stuff. The other uncomfortable thing was that I had to sit upright, propped up with pillows, and I wasn't allowed to roll onto my side for 4 weeks. That is pretty excruciating. Oh, and I wasn't allowed to sit down, as in a chair, for 7 weeks. For 7 weeks, I wasn't allowed to sit in a chair. 7 weeks. And if you've ever tried to use the loo without sitting, I'm just going to leave you with that thought. It was a challenge. And the other thing was I had to wear this post-surgical bra, which was pretty uncomfortable. It had to be quite tight and, supportive. And I also had to wear bicycle shorts that went down to below the knee. So full coverage spandex shorts, and they had to be a size too small for me. I had to wear those for 6 weeks. And wherever it was touching my skin, broke out in hives. I don't know if it was like heat rash or if it was an allergy to the material, but it was horrendous. And spent a good long time on Google trying to find cotton bicycle shorts, which was very difficult to find and very expensive, I might add. But the real kicker was that I couldn't sleep. I went from that night of not sleeping before the surgery thinking, at least afterwards I'm going to be so tired. I'm going to sleep and sleep and sleep. And I couldn't sleep at the hospital very well because they had to wake you up every couple hours for the first 24 hours. And then after that, there were lots of people in the ward and it was hot and noises, of course. And then now that I was home, I was propped up on pillows, not quite sitting up, not quite lying down. And I had to stay that way for 4 weeks and not roll onto my side while I slept. And I think maybe it was being too hot with all these pillows around me, or who knows, but my mind couldn't shut off anyway. But here I was at home. I was in my own bed and I was being waited on by Charlie, who brought me my meals. I was encouraged to get up. I was doing little like micro Pilates in bed, and it was fine as long as I didn't push myself too far or that little electrical shock thing would happen. I had friends come to visit me, and they would sit at the end of my bed in chairs and we would chit chat about what's going on out there. And I showed them all my scars, my perky French boob, and I felt like Madeline from the book Madeline, showing off her appendix scar. I felt quite proud of the plastic surgeons and what they had done. And then, of course, I was starting my 3 months of time to find my purpose, time to find the solution to all of my woes in 3 months. Are you ready? Steady, go. So I'll tell you my plan. My plan was to explore 3 avenues. The first one was garden design, because I had discovered the year before that I really enjoyed doing it when I tried to design our garden and then found out I didn't have any money to actually make any of my design come to pass. The second was that I was going to explore interior design, which I had always loved since I was a kid, and my grandmother used to basically flip houses, and she was a textile designer and just had impeccable taste. And I just loved her process and her excitement and love of this. And she had this gigantic stack of architectural digests, and I used to just bury myself in those magazines whenever I'd go to her house. And I had always been obsessed with making my spaces, I don't know, just right, make them sit with my soul. And I just thought, maybe this is what I should be doing, because it's businessy. It is a business. It's responsible. There is going to be transactions in place, but it will feed me creatively. And then the third thing I was going to explore was going back to the writing. And I needed to keep that for last because it was potentially the scariest thing for me, because I had already trained in it. I had spent a good 15 years of my life playing around with writing, but I didn't have the confidence in it. I didn't feel, and I didn't know if I had made the right choice to become a writer. I felt like I had dived into it out of panic. And I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing, or if I had just not had enough time to explore it and get my roots in. So those were my three things that I was going to explore over the 3 months. And it was so fun. It was great. I watched so many master courses on, Create Academy and master classes and all these things, and just really got to feed my curiosity, got to get back in touch with myself and the excitement inside of me. I love learning new things. I feel like that's why I just love listening to podcasts and reading books and whatever. It's like there's so much to know, which also makes it very confusing when you're trying to figure out what is the career that is my purpose, that is my soul calling. And is there even such a thing? But this was a great time when I felt supported. My friends were, again, being amazing and helping with child care, with play dates and pickups and drop-offs. And the school had stepped in and was helping with after-school care. And my mother-in-law had given us enough freezer meals to last for 3 months. The kids would come up and see me in the morning and in the afternoons and tell me about their day. And because I was no longer in this stress survival mode, I was able to relish their presence and their words. And because they weren't constantly pushing at me all day with their energy, I had space and time, and I wanted them to come, and I wanted hugs, and I could feel it. I could feel the love and the joy of them. I know it's cheesy to hear the word gratitude, but that's what it is. I felt so grateful that I had been given this gift. But then, of course, the 3 months was starting to come to a close, and I had not gone back to the writing because I just was not ready to do so. What I had wanted was to go back to my screenplay, but it's a historical drama, so I'd have to go back over all of my historical notes and get myself back into the mindset, and it just seemed like such a big job. I just avoided it. I felt resistant. And then, of course, it was the end of 3 months and I had to start teaching again, but I still didn't have much energy. I could feel, especially any social interaction really sucked the energy away from me so quickly. I really felt the need to keep to myself and to hold back, and especially with teaching as well. So I pared it way back and I started to teach a few hours here and there, but I knew I didn't have much to give. And then the other problem was it was school holidays now. Just as when Christmas came and really tested my energy, it happened again. It was school holidays, which meant 6 weeks of the kids being home, and I wasn't going to be able to work because they were going to be home. And, I thought, if I'm not working, I will have the energy. And the first thing that happened in this time period was we were going to go on a family holiday, our only holiday of the year, to Finland to stay with Charlie's cousins. And I felt excited. I felt like I had a new perspective on things, and I could enjoy and be present. And I was very excited to test this all out in beautiful Finland with my family. And we got to the airport, parked the car as far away in that furthest parking lot as possible, and got the coach in. We were checking in our luggage, and my youngest, his passport was flagged up. And it turned out his passport, because it was going to expire in less than 3 months, they wouldn't let him on the plane. Oh my gosh, we tried to reason it out as much as we could, but the bottom line was they were not going to let Asa onto the plane. They weren't going to let him travel. And Asa was beside himself, the poor little boy. He was so excited about going on a plane, and we had rented a hotel room, and they'd never been in a hotel room before. He was beside himself, in tears, saying, I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen. Oh my gosh, it broke my heart. It broke my husband's heart. Oh, you go with Elias, our oldest boy. And I said, no, of course not. I have to stay with Asa. Asa is definitely of that age where he needs me. He needs his mummy. And so we repacked our bags, and they went off. And Asa and I went off to try and find our way back to our car, which was pretty impossible. If anyone has tried to go the reverse way from departures, it's not easy. But we finally found our car after about an hour and a half. They were able to dig it out from whatever depths they had parked it in, and drove home. And we managed to go to his best friend's house, and I had a glass of wine. And Ace and I spent a week together. And obviously I took him to Peppa Pig World. And I was able to get him into, I think, a club for one day. So I had one day of kind of rest. But it was okay. It was great because Ace and I actually got to bond. And I think Charlie and Elias had a similar experience. I can say I could leave Peppa Pig World, but the rest of it was a bit magical, I have to say. And I ordered a lot of takeaways and did not cook for myself. I will tell you that. But that was the first pitfall of re-entry. And then the kids were home for another, 4 weeks after that. And again, just like Christmas, my energy levels were just not up to the task. When you are fatigued, your emotions just go the other direction. I ended up taking ashwagandha for the first time, which someone had recommended as kind of a natural Prozac. And they said, everyone in Los Angeles is on this. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So I took it, and it was actually fantastic. It was what I needed at that time because my stress, that coil inside of me, was winding up tight again, just from this constant need of my 2 young boys who want to talk to me 24/7. And then on top of that, trying to negotiate with myself my boundaries around the housework and everything, feeling again like I had to start pulling my weight. And there were no new rules. It was still the old rules were there, blaring in neon. And I felt beholden to return to them. And then I found another lump in my little perky Parisian breast. I found another lump. As you can imagine, it was got me really nervous. But at the same time, I had just had a mammogram 6 months previous. And this mammogram was fine. Everything was clear. They said it's, again, just another lump in that breast. That's a lumpy boob. And so I went home. But then another thing that happened around this time was that my face broke out in red, itchy hives. And I went to the dermatologist after resisting going to the dermatologist because my upbringing was we never take care of these things unless it's free. And so I had to put out, 80 pounds or whatever it was to go see this dermatologist, and hoping that in one session she was going to fix the problem. And she said it was stress. She said, what you're looking at is stress showing on your face. Stress comes through the skin. Um, and that was another little wake up call that I was returning back to the old ways and I needed to pull back. And I had also started to feel panicked because the kids were going to be going back to school soon. And I was nervous about what my next steps were going to be. I wasn't prepared to jump into the writing yet. I felt hugely blocked. And I didn't feel confident in interior design as the option. And I had dismissed garden design pretty much as a passion project because, gosh, you would definitely have to go back to school for that. It's so complicated. And my passion for it did not meet this criteria. And I started having these little kind of panic attacks. I purchased a TENS machine for the vagus nerve because a physio that I saw said that it helps with chronic fatigue. And I was having increased chronic fatigue and these panic attacks. And I thought maybe this is a solution. So I started using this little vagus nerve TENS machine. I was medicating myself with this and with ashwagandha and just pushing through. And I was still not talking to Charlie. I was avoiding him. I had also started to kind of pull away from social engagements because my well of energy was so shallow. I would get to the bottom so quickly, and it was usually completely drained by the time I had gotten the kids through the morning. But there was hope in that the kids were going to go back to school. But then I also had to go back to teaching, and I needed to teach more. The money, I needed to make this money. So what was I going to do? And then it was at this time that the universe reached out. My friend from America, Sarah, one of my oldest, dearest friends, contacted me, and she was running The Artist's Way, which is a 12-step kind of program of recovery for blocked creatives. That's how it's pitched. And it was a book written by Julia Cameron in the 90s. She was married to James Cameron. And I think some other famous people as well. And I had dismissed this. It's funny because I had actually bought the book just before my last surgery because I thought I'll read this when I'm in my 3 months and see if it helps me to unblock myself. And I had tried, but I just found it too dense. I couldn't quite navigate it. My eyes would glaze over. It didn't seem accessible to me. And here was Sarah reaching out, and she said, join me for this 13-week course. I think you could really use it. And it was going to be an hour and a half every Sunday over Zoom in the evening, which I would have to stake my claim to. And poor Charlie was going to have to do bedtime by himself, meals and bedtime. So it felt indulgent. It felt like I felt a great deal of guilt in this. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't say no. It was my opportunity to do something for myself again, just like when I learned all that fermentation stuff. And just as when I took those master classes, this was something. And I knew I was at an impasse. Something else had to shift, and I didn't know what it was. So I said yes. And then it was around the same time that I was listening to the Ins and Outs podcast, which is an interior and garden design podcast that I'd started listening to. And they had Dr. Tara Swart on as a guest, and she's a neuroscientist. And she was talking all about how affirmations, gratitudes, manifestations, and vision boards can work when employed in the right way through neuroscience. And this really piqued my curiosity. Here was another kind of mystical practice that I had completely dismissed, similar to the Artist's Way, which I dismissed the Artist's Way because in Los Angeles, everyone seemed to have done it. And they talked about it ad nauseum, and it just seemed a bit cultish. It also had a whiff of Christianity about it, and I'm not religiously minded, so I just didn't think it was for me. And the other great thing that was going to happen was that Charlie had said, we need to have a little holiday, just you and I. And I was very nervous about this because I thought, oh my gosh, does this mean I'm going to have to tell him what I'm thinking and all these things that are going on in my head? Will my gremlins be exposed when I have not yet exercised them? But we planned on a 3-day mini break to somewhere in the Mediterranean, to the sun. And the summer had been pretty rubbish. The UK is not known for its weather, if you didn't know that. And I was dying for some sun and some time to just lie on a sun lounger. So we booked a little holiday to Sardinia, which was really exciting, which was going to happen the first week the kids had gone back to school. And so I started The Artist's Way, and it was really interesting because it was so much more accessible when you did it as a group. Suddenly it just opened up, and Julie Cameron is quite meandering and poetical, and it is quite thick, but thick with metaphor and imagery. And what she does is she kind of leads you on a kind of diagnostic MOT of your body and of your mind and of your soul. And over the course of 12 weeks, you go through these themes and you unpick the things that you aren't doing for yourself and where you are blocked. It's really effective. The other thing I found was that it's not really just about artists. It's about us as creative beings. And the point is we're all creative. It's not just people who you think, oh, they're good at art. And, that's someone who's in a creative industry. It's not just about somebody who self-identifies as a creative. It's about everyone looking into themselves and seeing why they're blocked. And giving you tools, giving you tiny little tasks and things that just kind of pick one little thread at a time, and the whole picture, the whole thing gets repaired gently. It's eye-opening stuff. And it starts to use affirmations. The only two kind of things that she asks you to do, for sure, along this 12-week journey is that every day you write for 3 pages in a journal. They're called morning pages. And you stream of consciousness, just write down whatever comes into your head for 3 pages. And then you close it and you don't look back at it, not for several weeks at least. You don't ever have to look back at it if you don't want to, but you're just getting every single thought, every single little niggle out of your brain onto the paper. And there's a kind of reflection, there's a kind of validation there. And you also realize when you're hiding things from yourself. You realize what your blind spots are because you're avoiding something. You don't want to write something down. So one way or the other, it draws your attention to the things that are not working in your life. And the other thing she asks you to do is go on artist dates, which is you taking yourself off for an hour to 2 hours a week by yourself, not with any friends, not even with a dog, going by yourself someplace that's stimulating. And it could be you're going to an art gallery. That's a very simple interpretation of it. It could be that you're going on a walk someplace, especially someplace new. It could be that you're going to a button shop to go find the perfect button for something that you've lost a button from. It doesn't matter so long as you're present and you're experiencing this and allowing yourself to listen to yourself and to listen to everything around you and be present. And there's so many little exercises and things she does, and she works with affirmations. And I started to listen to the book The Source, which is Dr. Tara Swart again, and she talks about these affirmations, and she talks about journaling as being central and really important. And there was so much crossover between the two. I could see how the reason The Artist's Way works is because of this neuroscience that Dr. Tara Swart is talking about. And it was working for me. All of a sudden I realized that what I hadn't been doing is taking care of myself on a much more basic level. self-care was non-existent, in that I didn't give myself any space. I didn't give myself forgiveness. I didn't give myself love. I still was allowing these gremlins to creep around on my back and make me feel shame and make me feel like I have to hide my feelings and my thoughts and that I'm not justified in having them. It makes me not able to speak my mind because I feel that I don't have authority for some reason. And why is this? When I did have authority at some point and somehow I lost it. And one of the things that struck me in the book The Source right away was this main idea of us living in either a lack mindset or an abundant mindset. And as soon as she mentioned this, it really struck a chord with me because I knew that immediately I'm in a lack mindset. I'm a lack thinker. And it's the same as if you call it survival mode. You're living in stress, chronic stress, cortisol. It is when your brain is basically locked down because it feels like it's under attack. It feels like it doesn't have freedom. It doesn't have support. And an abundant mindset, a brain that thinks abundantly, feels like the world is your oyster. There is enough bounty for everyone, and you are compelled to share, and you're compelled to take risks, and you're compelled to just be happy and optimistic because there is bounty and you are safe and you are taken care of. And immediately, of course, my brain thought, well, how can you think abundantly if you don't have enough money? And that is one of the other things that came up for me in The Artist's Way. The Artist's Way pointed a big fat finger at the fact that I have no money mindset health at all. That from childhood, I know that my mindset has been set by my relationship with my parents. And like I've said before, living in a place where you had to fend for yourself, you shouldn't grumble, you shouldn't complain, you shouldn't speak out your emotions, and you should take care of everything yourself because it's not a big deal and you should be strong enough to handle it yourself. And we don't spend money on things like dermatologists or vacations. And then I had left and I had gone out into the world with no money and heaps of student debt and no health insurance. So I had lived in this kind of lockdown money mindset. And then we had gotten married and had children. And again, there just wasn't any money floating around. The cost of living had gone up and mortgages had gone up and COVID had happened and everything got squeezed and time was squeezed. And Charlie and I had been living this survival mode, this feeling of just hunker down, and there's no money for anything extra. There's no money for any self-care, for even going out and getting a cup of coffee. That was frowned upon. And you can't live your life like that forever. It's okay to have austerity for a stint, and you know there's an end in sight, or you know there's a goal and you're moving towards that. But when the goal keeps on moving out to the furthest distance away from you until it's over the horizon, and my brain just kept on going back to, but it's a money issue. It's a money issue. But it's not. It's not a money issue. This doesn't have to be a have or have nots. It's about if you feel safe and secure. If you feel safe and secure, you're more likely to have this glass half full, look at everything as a little bit of an adventure, a healthy risk to be taken. If you don't feel safe and you're not being taken care of, you're going to feel like life is just getting you down and it's a series of struggles to the top and everyone else is going to beat you to it. And I realized this about myself. Again, I feel like I'm a glass half full person, but I've been stuck in a glass half empty mind And I wanted to break the case. I wanted to shatter the glass and escape from this, because with that would come confidence, would come motivation, would come creativity. I could see how this was my big block. And what Dr. Tara Swart was doing with her book, The Source and the Neuroscience, and what Julia Cameron was doing in The Artist's Way was one and the same. Dr. Tara Swart explained the science of how you can change your mind, how you can prime your brain for abundance, and that no matter what age you can do this. This is neuroplasticity. They now know this to be absolutely true. You can change your brain at any age. And Julia Cameron gave you all these kind of gentle, nourishing tasks and tools to support this work. And the other thing I was going to say was that The Artist's Way didn't turn out to be about religion. It was that Julia Cameron is Christian, and she uses the word God as her kind of placeholder for spiritual connection. But she said very openly from the beginning, this is a placeholder. You replace it with the thing that speaks to you. And that was another thing that came up for me, was that I realized I didn't have anything to replace that with. What was my spiritual placeholder? What was my connection to the universe? I didn't have one. People had said, "Oh, you seem very spiritual to me." But I was like, no, I'm not religious. I don't believe in God. I'm agnostic. I don't know. And what I ended up realizing through The Artist's Way was that I was spiritual. And this filled me with curiosity and excitement and a feeling of wholeness and comfort and positivity. And I didn't know that that was something that was missing. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then another thing that The Artist's Way and The Source pointed to. Also some other teachers that I started to learn from. Again, all of this started to wend together. It all was supported by the neuroscience, and it all worked in this kind of gentle, overarching shift. And I want to share that with you. So next time, we will talk more about this abundance and lack thinking and how we prime the brain to make ourselves more pliable, how we can become more agile and more balanced through this neuroscience and through these teachers. And in trying to record this episode, I was really affected recently by a podcast interview with James Hollis, who's like a Jungian psychologist. He quoted Jung. He said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parent." I just want to leave you with that because it struck such a chord in me. Because along this journey, I've thought a lot about the scars of childhood and what has given me the autopilot that I have, the gremlins on my back. And I've also thought a lot about what I am doing to my own children, the stage that I'm setting for them to leap off of, and the mindset that I am giving them with every decision that I make, with every reaction to them. What am I teaching them subconsciously? So again, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parent. But then I want to leave you with another little quote, which my son told me today. He said, "I like the deal of you, Mummy. It's good." Again, he said, "I like the deal of you, Mummy. It's good." So maybe something's working. If if you like this podcast, please like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. If I get enough followers, I can tempt on some really interesting people to talk to us about all of these things and many other things besides. And I'd love to take you along for the journey. So yeah, let's go forth, put some welly into it, and get outside. Get outside. I'll see you next time. Bye.